Imagine that you wake up every single morning and your only job is to lie, not to protect yourself, not to scare off a predator, but to steal. Imagine that you've gotten so good at it, so impossibly precise that you can mimic over 50 different alarm calls, that you know exactly which call to use for which victim at which moment, and that you pass this knowledge down to your children. This isn't a story about a con artist, or a criminal, or a mastermind. This is a story about a small black bird, barely the size of your fist, and it may be one of the most sophisticated liars on planet Earth. Meet the fork-tailed Drongo, Dicrurus adsimilis, a bird found across sub-Saharan Africa. At first glance, there's nothing remarkable about it. It's small, it's black, its tail splits into two distinctive points at the end. That's where the name comes from. In fact, if you saw one sitting in a tree, you'd probably think nothing of it, just another African bird. But here's what separates the Drongo from every other bird in that tree. The Drongo doesn't hunt by strength, it doesn't hunt by speed, it doesn't even hunt particularly well on its own, to be honest. The Drongo hunts by manipulation. You see, the African savanna is a noisy place. Dozens of species coexist in a delicate web of communication. When a predator is spotted, alarm calls ring through the air, and every animal within earshot freezes, or runs, or flies away. This system works because it's built on trust. And the Drongo has figured out exactly how to exploit that trust. Here's how the con works. The fork-tailed Drongo spends a lot of time following other animals. Meerkats, mostly, but also pied babblers, southern ground hornbills, and over 20 other species. And it genuinely helps them. That's the first part of the trick. The Drongo acts as a lookout. It sits high in a tree while the meerkats forage on the ground below. If a real predator appears, a hawk, a jackal, the Drongo sounds the alarm, everybody runs, everybody's safe. The meerkats appreciate this. They've learned to trust the Drongo's calls, and that trust, built over millions of years of co-evolution, is exactly the weapon the Drongo is waiting to use. Because here's where it gets dark. When a meerkat finds something particularly good, a scorpion, a large insect, a juicy grub, the Drongo watches. And then it gives the alarm. Not because there's a predator. There isn't. Because the meerkat drops its food and runs, and the Drongo swoops down and takes it. The entire thing takes less than 3 seconds. Now, you might think, okay, that's clever, but the meerkats will figure it out eventually, right? They'll learn not to trust a false alarm. And they do. Here's where the Drongo's intelligence becomes genuinely disturbing. In 2014, a team of researchers from the University of Cape Town published a study that changed how scientists think about animal cognition. They found that the Drongo doesn't just use one alarm call. It uses different alarm calls, calls that belong to completely different species. When the meerkats stop reacting to the Drongo's own alarm, the Drongo switches to a meerkat alarm call. When that stops working, it switches to a hornbill alarm call, then a babbler call, then another species. It cycles through them, one by one, until it finds one the meerkat hasn't heard recently enough to distrust. The researchers counted over 51 different alarm calls in the Drongo's repertoire. 51. And here's the part that should actually make you stop and think. The Drongo doesn't use these calls randomly. It adapts its strategy in real time based on what's already failed. It remembers which call it used last. It tracks whether the deception worked. That's not instinct. That's something much closer to planning. But there's one final piece to this story, and it's the one that scientists are still debating. Young Drongos don't hatch knowing how to do any of this. They learn it. Researchers have observed adult Drongos actively teaching their offspring which calls to use, when to use them, and critically, which calls are most effective against which species. Think about what that means. There are Drongos in southern Africa that have specific, fine-tuned, deceptive strategies against specific communities of meerkats, strategies that were developed, refined, and passed down through generations. The meerkats in that region have never seen the Drongo that originally developed the trick, but the Drongo's great-great-grandchild is still using it against them. That is cultural transmission. It's one of the rarest behaviors in the animal kingdom. Previously, it was thought to be almost exclusively human, and a small black bird in the Kalahari is doing it. To steal scorpions, So here's the question I want to leave you with. We tend to think of deception as something uniquely human, something that requires language and consciousness and moral awareness. But the Drongo doesn't need any of that. It lies. It adapts its lies. It teaches its children to lie. And it has been doing so for thousands of generations, long before the concept of honesty even existed. Which raises a deeply uncomfortable question. Is deception a feature? Not a flaw, not a corruption, but an evolutionary advantage so powerful that it has emerged independently in birds, in primates, in fish, in insects. Maybe the question isn't why animals lie. Maybe the question is, why do we ever tell the truth?